I lived in Mexico City for a few months this last year, and I thought it was an amazing city for certain people, but I personally wouldn't live there long term again. So let's talk about the 10 pros and cons of living in Mexico City as a digital nomad. First pro for Mexico City is the museums. Mexico City is the city with one of the most museums in the world, with over 150 recognized museums. That's more than Paris and New York. Every Wednesday, they have something called Noche de Museos, which is basically where the participating museums open from 6 to 10 p.m. and they can be a fun evening activity. So if you're into art and history, you are not going to run out of things to do in Mexico City. Now, moving on to the first con of living in Mexico City is the air quality and pollution. I was training for a marathon while I was in Mexico City, so I was running every day, and I had to run in the mornings only, especially once rainy season was over. There was no kind of reset with the rain, so the air quality was horrible. I remember there was this one day where I wasn't able to make it to the run in the morning, so I went for it in the afternoon around 3, 4 p.m. Literally only a kilometer in, my throat was burning. It felt horrible. When I'd go on my longer runs, I would save those for Sunday because Sunday is the best day in terms of air quality to go and do it. So I'd save it for that day, but if I was running a 20, 30 kilometer run, my throat just felt so sore. It was even to the point where, your hair feels dirty or my skin got worse while I was there. It's still kind of recovering, but it's doing a lot better than when I was in Mexico City. So it's all these things together. This is actually a huge reason why I wouldn't live in Mexico City longer term, because I just don't think that it's really worth it and that can't be healthy for you. And just so you know, I don't think I'm even that sensitive to poor air quality. I lived in Medellin before that, which is also known for having bad air quality, but I honestly didn't even notice it at all. I didn't really have any negative effects from it. So Mexico City is truly bad. If you've lived in Medellin and you thought that air quality was bad, I don't recommend Mexico City even a little bit. Second pro is no surprise to anyone about Mexico City, or probably any city in Mexico, but it's the delicious food. Mexican cuisine is undoubtedly one of the best cuisines in the world. So if you're a foodie, you're going to have a great time with all the street food and everything in Mexico. It's going to be heaven for you. Con number 2 for Mexico City is it's a loud city. All Latin American big cities are loud, and I'd say Mexico City is the loudest one, and that's the general consensus I've seen online as well. So if you like a quiet city, it's not for you. I love the big city noise. It didn't bother me one bit, but if that's something that bothers you, the people yelling about the mangoes and they're buying your refrigerator and blah, 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 not the place for you. Maybe try a little bit of a quieter town in Mexico instead. The next pro for Mexico City is cost of living. Now, if you compare Mexico City to a low cost of living American city, you're not going to see as big of a difference as you might expect. But I don't think that's a fair comparison. Mexico City is the largest North American city, so when you compare it to other big cities in North America like Toronto and New York, the prices in Mexico City are incredible. Cost of groceries is pretty much the same as the States, and if you're looking at rent prices in the more popular neighborhoods like Polanco and Roma Norte, it's, again, not going to be far off of low cost of living cities in the States. However, for me, I speak Spanish, so I didn't have to stay in the touristy areas. I stayed in a neighborhood called Jardín Balbuena, which is just as close to the city center, but it's on the opposite side of Roma Norte and Polanco. So I was just as close, but the prices were way better. I had a 1-bedroom with terrace for less than $1,000 per month. So you can still get great value if you can stay outside of those neighborhoods. Moving on to the next con for Mexico City is the traffic. Probably the worst city I've ever experienced in my life for traffic, more than New York and London, which are both known for having really bad traffic. So I would never want to drive around Mexico City. I mean, they've even tried to combat this with multi-level highways. It looks really complex. And even with that, you often find yourself in standstill traffic. Now, this does lead me into my next pro, which is that Mexico City has an excellent metro system. It's very expansive. I'd say it covers anywhere you'd really want to go inside of the city. And one really cool thing, I do have to say, it gets very busy, but one cool thing is they have a separate section, which is women-only carts. And you just feel a lot more safe because you're really, as I said, it's a busy metro, so you're really squished up against people. But if it's just women around you, then you do feel more comfortable for sure. And it smells a lot better than the general carts. So I thought that was pretty cool that they had that. Final con for Mexico City is La Venganza de Moctezuma. Moctezuma's revenge. This is a term for the tummy ache that a lot of foreigners get when they visit Mexico City. For context, Moctezuma was the emperor of the Aztec Empire at the beginning of the Spanish conquest. So I think it's a bit of a clever term they've come up with there, but I personally didn't have any issues with it. It's not even just Americans that have this specific issue. For example, when I was in Colombia before I was going to go to Mexico City, the Colombians were warning me about how I was going to get sick and I need to have this medication and whatnot. So you'd think that because in Colombia the food is known to be a little bit unsafe as well, you'd think their gut bacteria would be able to handle that, but Apparently not. So if you know that you're a little bit sensitive to, I guess, food poisoning, maybe it'd be best to have some sort of medication to make that easier on yourself as a warning. But again, I didn't have that experience eating street food. I don't know, not a personal con, but it's one to be aware of because I know it's very, very common. Fifth pro was actually one of my favorites, and it's that not only is the city architecturally beautiful, but it's also very diverse. When you're in the city center, you're going to see the beautiful cathedral in El Zócalo, you'll see La Torre Latinoamericana, you see the Palacio de Bellas Artes, all that is in El Centro. You'll see a lot of French and Italian architectural influence inside of the city center. Then you go over to Polanco and there's the Castillo de Chapultepec, which is beautiful. You also see the Museo Sumaya. That structure is super impressive. And then in Coyoacán, they're more of the colonial buildings, colorful colonial buildings. And in Roma Norte, it's more of that Art Deco style. So it's just so diverse and eye-catching. I just find it an interesting city to walk around, and there's always something that will catch your eye, which I personally love. I'm a person who loves to just go on walks and just look around and just, I don't know. So for me, it was perfect. I really enjoyed that aspect of Mexico City. Final pro for Mexico City is it's one of the few countries that has a 180-day visa. So you can stay there for a lot of time. That's basically the pro, is you can stay and immerse yourself. As I said, there's so much to do. There's so many foods to try, so many museums to go to, different things to see. I went on this beautiful volcano hike. That was a lot of fun. So because you have that 180-day visa, you just have the flexibility to explore that a lot more versus most countries that only have a 90-day visa. That's it for my pros and cons, but I do have this extra point that is basically how I'm going to finish this video, and it can be a pro for some people, but for me it was a con. And it's that Mexico City feels very American. Obviously, Mexico in general has a lot of influence from the States, but the capital city does especially. And I'm not just saying this because of Roma Norte and Polanco. Even in the middle-class neighborhood where I was staying, it just felt like being in an American city where people speak Spanish, which is not too different. I left Toronto to feel like I'm in a very different environment. And especially because I speak Spanish, there's nothing that really holds me back from really being able to immerse myself more in a culture that feels a little bit more different. So in the future, when I visit Mexico again, I plan on staying in smaller cities where I think I'll get a little bit of a different feel for Mexico. Now, even though this was a little bit of a con for me, I think this actually makes Mexico City the best, or one of the best, beginner digital nomad destinations. You're going to be able to get around so easily with English. You'll be able to make a lot of friends with people and not feel homesick. You'll find that things don't really operate differently than they do in your home country. And if you do need to get back home for whatever reason, you're such a short flight away. So I think if you're looking for the first place to go as a digital nomad, Mexico City might actually be one of the best to go to. Now, if you have any pros or cons you want to add, go ahead and leave them in the comments. Any questions you have about Mexico City, I'm happy to answer as well. Don't forget to leave me a like and subscribe if you want to see more. See you next Sunday.